Hey guys, today we are going to do some quiz review. The focus of today though, or today's video at least, is to review some older stuff, which is some equation solving, because that's kind of what you're probably more rusty on. The practice problems have a little bit of everything on it, but I wanted to make this video specifically for the equation solving aspect of the quiz. While we do that, I do want to introduce a, alternate way to solve quadratic equations, which is by factoring. It's not necessarily new information, but you may not remember that you can actually use factoring to solve certain quadratic equations. So you can do this, or you can use quadratic formula, just depending on your preference and the problem. So let's see what they look like side by side. If we are going to solve by factoring, we can go ahead and start by simply factoring the equation, and I think this is the second time I made this mistake. I should have a y equals there. But let's go ahead and start by making the box. Remember, factoring is the one with the box and the diamond. Okay? And so we take the first term, put it in the top left box, and we take the last term, the third term, and put it in the bottom right box. Okay, once we do that, we are ready to create our diamond, or giant X, whatever you prefer to call it. Recall that in the top of your diamond, you have to put the first term times the third term. So 15 times x squared is 15x squared. And then in the bottom goes this negative 8x. It's always the middle term in the bottom. All right, once you have your setup for your x, this is where you get to play the game and decide what two numbers to use. Recall that for the top, you got to figure out what multiplies to that number, and the bottom is for what it needs to add to. So if we need to find two numbers that multiply to make 15x squared and add to make negative 8x, you think a little bit, you think, oh, well, 5 times 3 equals 15, but 5 plus 3 is positive 8, not negative. This is where you play around with the signs for a bit, and hopefully you would realize that 5 and 3, if you make them both negative, they fit the bill. Okay, so if we did negative 5x and negative 3x, and test them out, negative 5 times negative 3 is 15, and negative 5 plus negative 3 is negative 8. That is how you know that you are good to go. All right, now that we've done that, we can go ahead and fill in the outside of the box, or fill out the outside of the box. Here and here we have x and x as usual. And then we got negative 3 here because we have to figure out x times what gets us this negative 3x. And so by that same principle, we get a negative 5 here. Okay, and then at that point, we found our factored form equation. It's going to be x minus 5 and x minus 3. And so usually what we've done with factoring so far is just find the factored form and call it quits at that point. But what I want you guys to realize is that if we wanted to solve this equation, we can say that we have our factored form set equal to 0. Okay, and so now this is just zero product property. Right? You guys know how to solve ones like this. You can take this and you realize, okay, x equals 5, and this one tells us that x equals 3. You just take the opposite of what's in there. And then you are good to go with the factoring method. So really, the factoring method of solving is just factoring like usual, and then using zero product property at the end. Also, I guess really what I should say is that this portion should be equal to 0, not actually y, since we're solving. All right, so, okay, this is gonna bother me. I'll put it on the other side. So if you like that, that's great. You can go for it. Otherwise, we always have good old trusty quadratic formula. So I'll do an example of that. We would say that our A is going to be 1, because there's no number here, so we can just assume that it's automatically 1. Our B is going to be negative 8, because that's the number, wow, I didn't even write the A. Okay, negative 8 is the number with the x, and then our c is just the number that's all by itself. Okay, and now that we have that, we can go ahead and plug into our formula. So we have negative 1 times b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a, our a is 1, times c, our c is 15. And then we put all of that over 2 times a, and again our a is 1, so that's what we're going to put there. Once you have set it all up in the formula, you are ready to go ahead and start simplifying things. This right here is negative 1 times negative 8, and that's just going to turn into positive 8. And then in the square root, we can start simplifying these little pieces, right? Negative 8 squared is positive 64. Please make sure if you do that, you use parentheses in your calculator, or else it will be wrong. Okay, and then negative 4 times 1 times 15 is going to be negative 60. 2 times 1 is just 2. Right, and we can simplify this one more time. We know that 64 minus 60 is just 4. So we can change this to 4. All right, and then we can just calculate that. We know that 8 plus or minus 2 is going to be where we end up there. So now that we have simplified it to the absolute most that we can, we get to break it out into our two answers. One uses the plus, 8 plus 2 divided by 2. This is going to be 10 over 2, which is just 5. And then the other one is with the minus, so 8 minus 2 divided by 2, which is just 6 over 2, and that's 3. And if you'll notice, we got 5 and 3, just like we did here when we factored. So it's up to you which method you want to use. I do want to note down here that quadratic formula will always work, regardless of what the quadratic equation is. Factoring will only work if your answers in the end are going to be whole numbers and not like fractions or decimals. All right, and then I have two more examples that I want to do with you. This one is just zero product property. We kind of went over it with the factoring example. You've got to just set each one equal to 0. X minus 4 equals 0. X minus 6 equals 0. Once you solve these two equations, you get x equals 4 and x equals 6. Something worth noting is that if I give you the factored form of a quadratic equations, you can use these to immediately find out that your x-intercepts are 4, 0 and 6, 0. Okay, factored form is the way that you can very, very quickly find x-intercepts. All right, at the end here, I figured you guys might need a refresher on this. If we are solving an equation for y, that means we just have to do what it takes to get y by itself. So the first thing I want to do is subtract the 2x from both sides, and I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite this. All right, so subtract 2x from both sides so that we can start to get that y term by itself on the left side of the equal sign. What's really important here, and this is what everybody always messes up, is that when we do 6 minus 2x, we cannot just call that 4, right? 6 and 2x do not combine, so we literally just leave it as 6 minus 2x. Okay, and then the last step is to divide both sides by negative 3, because remember, our goal is to get y completely by itself. So that negative 3 is an eyesore. So at the end, our final answer is basically 6 minus 2x over negative 3, which you can simplify, and if you can simplify it, please do that. So 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2. And then negative 2x over negative 3, you can't really divide those, so you would just leave it as 2x over 3. Notice how it turned into a plus, and the reason for that is because this negative divided by a negative gives you a positive answer. So this would be final answer. If you put this on your quiz, I will not mark that wrong. That is totally valid answer as well. Okay, that is all.